Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. My name's Detective Constable Dan Maund. I am, believe it or not, a police officer, and I work for the Regional Organised Crime Unit in the South East. Now, we cover Surrey, Sussex, Hampshire, and Thames Valley in the UK. To give you just an idea of how we're set up, we sit underneath the National Crime Agency and the National Cyber Security Centre. Those are the keys in the name there, really. It's national, so they will deal with national infrastructure, power stations, communications, that kind of stuff. And we will deal with small businesses, organisations, so schools, charities, councils, and obviously similar sized businesses as well. A little bit about myself. I am, as I said, a police officer. I've been a police officer for just over 16 years now. And if you're sat there thinking, well, this is about cybersecurity and things like that, why on earth am I going to be listening to a police officer? If I wanted to learn how to bake a cake, I'd probably hire a baker. And you'd be, right to ask that sort of question. But the reason is that over the last 16 years, digital devices and technology has infiltrated every part of daily life. We can't get away from it. And I've investigated a lot of different crimes, frauds, attempted murders, indecent images, you name it. I've been there, I've seen it, and I cannot remember the last time I investigated something that did not involve technology of some description, whether it be a text message, GPS data, browsing history, whatever it might be. I've had to learn that technology myself to some extent, and then when I take matters to court, I've got to present it to a jury of normal people. So I like to think of myself as a translator, really, of translating the technical into something that's manageable to your average human being, and hopefully we can do some of that today with Insider Threat. If you're wondering if that is me in the picture, it isn't. I'm pleased to say I have been in that situation. Unfortunately, you're far enough away from me, hopefully, that's not going to happen today. So that's all good. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about Insider Threat. And we need to sort of, before we go into that, I want to divide it into two sections. It's really, really important to remember that everybody in a business is an insider, and therefore an insider threat can be completely accidental. Part of what we do is that we treat user awareness, and we do that by providing free live presentations to businesses. And what we do in our region is mapped nationally across the UK. You can see on the screen now, that is our email address. If you happen to live in or work in our regions, Surrey, Sussex, Hampshire and Thames Valley, you're very welcome to email me at that address, and we can get you set up with a live presentation at your workplace. And if you live outside those regions, then just get in touch and I'll put you in touch with the correct region. So we try to treat that accidental insider threat, but today the main focus of what I talk about is going to be the deliberate insider action. So in order to do that, I'm going to talk about the curious case of Donald. Now, Donald was the head of IT at a school in Surrey. And eventually Donald lost his job because he'd been embezzling £200,000 worth over about 18 months, embezzling IT equipment and conspiring with a corrupt supplier in order to do so. Now, he wasn't fired because of the embezzlement. That wasn't discovered until later. What actually happened was the headmaster of the school decided that he went to an awareness presentation, funnily enough, I guess, and decided that he wanted to test, how good the security at the school was, having spent all this money on the technology. Now, of course, the pen test went really badly because the technology didn't exist. It hadn't been purchased. And while they tried to get to the bottom of why it turned into such a disaster, Donald got put onto gardening leave. So they started to investigate why it was so easy to get in, and they carried on with that. So have a think about that situation at the moment. Donald's the head of IT at the school. There's something not quite right. Donald gets sent away on gardening leave, and they investigate what's going on. So have a think of that as your business. Are there things that you think should happen in that scenario straight away? In fact, before Donald even leaves the building to go on his gardening leave. The clue there really is in the name of his job. He's the head of IT. What has he got? What's he got access to? He's got access to administrative rights across the network. He potentially can set up accounts that we don't even know about across that network, service accounts. He will be perhaps in receipt of, in possession of other users' passwords. All of that kind of stuff is available to him. So before he even leaves the building, for having been asked to go away for a little while, we need to be thinking about a full password reset across the organisation and an audit of all of the user accounts in that particular scenario. Now, in this particular example, that didn't happen. Over the next few weeks, Donald got back into the organisation remotely. He repeatedly attacked the school, deleting data, disabling their internet connection randomly, and eventually he got so fed up, and possibly after one or two drinks, physically broke into the premises and used his knowledge of the inside, the architecture of the building, to get to the server room and to cut through their fibre optic cables with a tool of some description. And as a result of that, Donald was ultimately arrested, charged and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. However, Donald didn't turn up to his court hearing, and so he is still on the run out there. We don't know if he's in the UK. I'd like to think perhaps he is. So if any of you are hiring at the moment for IT and you spot Donald rocking up to the interview, do give us a call. Anyway, so that is the sort of case study example, and I highlighted a couple of things that went wrong in there. So I want to move on to this next slide, and we're going to run through a few little tips that I want you to consider when you're trying to treat insider threat. And again, remember, I'm talking about deliberate insider threat here predominantly. So one of the key things that you need to think about is the relationship between your IT department and your HR department. This is absolutely key. Most organisations probably think have policies in place that makes most of this relatively straightforward, but key to those policies should be the need to make IT aware not only of new employees, but departmental transfers. That is the key one that always gets forgotten, and people leaving, particularly dismissals. There are other things that we might need to consider as well. Circumstances that might elevate risk in relation to a specific user. So, for example, in Donald's case, perhaps a grievance or some sort of cloud that's hovering over that individual that might elevate the risk. We've got to think about that. It needs to be passed on and actioned in a timely manner. So a leaver account should be disabled before that individual even leaves the premises, or immediately before they're informed of a redundancy or dismissal. It shouldn't be a case that HR are making IT aware of something and then it's not actioned until a few days after the event. What about policy in the context? Well, the primary functions of this relationship can be streamlined by ensuring that the actions are included as mandatory on existing policy, or defining suitable policies to cover these eventualities. So the context has got to be considered. What are the circumstances? Why is this individual moving or leaving? What grade of user is affected? What permissions does this person have? Does this elevate risk to the other business groups that requires additional action? So in our example, the head of IT is dismissed. Do we need to consider a universal password reset and account audit across the board to make sure that we reduce that risk significantly? So context is absolutely key. You can have a policy, but each case is going to be individual, and we've got to consider the context surrounding it. We're going to talk about least privilege as well. So all new users, when they join an organisation, all user accounts should be opened on the principle of having least privilege. In theory, it should actually start with 0 privilege to any network resources at all. So when someone joins the organisation, they shouldn't even be able to use the computer, and everything should just be opened up as and when they require it. So you gradually open out the resources rather than starting at all the resources being available and then closing things down when you think it becomes risky. It's obviously a little bit impractical to start someone with 0 access, so the business needs to decide a sort of minimum baseline for users in each of the different business groups and business areas. Things that you should be considering is whether or not staff really need to be able to run and install programs on their own. Clearly, if you've got the ability to run and install a program, you can run and install a virus when you're using email. So if you don't need that ability, switch it off, and then you're less likely to be susceptible to things like viruses. Does everybody need remote access? Quite frequently we run into organisations where remote access is just enabled across the board, and quite a few people don't ever use it, so there's no point in them having remote access. It just opens up the attack surface for a cyber criminal to get into that business. Does everybody need to be able to use USB devices on the network? I'm sure most of us think it's quite convenient to be able to move things around on USB sticks and to our mobile phones into charge on the company computers, but it introduces a new level of risk. A couple of different attacks there. First of all, a mobile phone is just another computer. If you don't have antivirus and things like that running on the mobile phone and you just plugged it into your company network to charge, there's the potential of a transfer of malware from one device to the other. Another attack which has been used before is the people dropping USB sticks outside work premises, and they're infected with malware. Most people that find a USB stick on the floor are very, very likely to plug it into the first available USB port they can find, which of course is going to be inside the work building. So if you don't need to be able to use USB devices, switch off that capability. And here's another key one for those of you out there who happen to be the chief executive of the organisation. Quite a lot of CEOs like to have massive amounts of visibility into absolutely every corner of the organisation. But have a think about this. Does the CEO actually need administrator rights to the IT? Do they actually need read and write access to all of those files? The answer in most cases is absolutely not. They don't need it at all. And with CEOs being a particular target for cyber criminals, you know, because they have access to the finances and the data and the information, actually the CEO should be one of those people who really is limited in scope as to what they have access to and what they can damage. As I mentioned earlier, resources should be opened out to the user when it becomes necessary to enable them to perform that business function rather than the reverse. So when an individual no longer needs access to a particular feature, then that resource should be removed immediately. It shouldn't be taking a significant amount of time to remove that access. Consider the intern theory as well. We mentioned earlier just about the HR policy, and I said that departmental transfers are often overlooked. So the intern joins the organisation, they perhaps do a week in sales, they're given access to the sales portfolio and the sales resources. Once that week is over, the intern moves to marketing, and they're given access to the marketing portfolio, access to the marketing resources, and they carry on, and perhaps they'll then move into the HR department for a week and do some work with them, and so on and so forth. Now, as they move around the organisation, they're picking up more and more and more access, and if no one's taking that access away, before you know it, the intern is the most powerful person in the organisation, simply because they haven't had that access taken away. So other things that you should consider is regularly auditing your user accounts. So make a plan to sweep those user accounts regularly, check which ones are inactive, do you actually need them? If you don't, disable them or remove them altogether. And in addition, perform privilege audits to make sure that you're remaining compliant with that least privilege idea. Make sure that everybody's got just the right privileges for what they need to perform their job function. Avoid shared accounts. These are accounts which can be accessed by multiple people. I know that we have sort of team mailboxes and things like that, but typically you will be added to that as an individual user. I'm talking about truly shared accounts where everybody has a shared username and password, particularly where they've got an administrative function. The reason I say that is because if I've got that, there is no audit trail, or it's significantly harder to present an audit trail to identify the actions of an individual using that account if several people are able to use it. It gives deniability to a malicious insider at the end of the day. Division of responsibility. Does one account or one individual, if compromised, represent a catastrophic threat to the business? If you're able to identify an individual or an account that could literally put you out of business, then you need to separate the responsibilities where you can. So for example, IT administrators, you might give them 2 accounts. So the administrator would have one with administrative privilege for that sole purpose, so when they're actually performing the administrator role on the network. But they should have a second account with normal user privileges for doing things like browsing, emails, document handling. That makes a catastrophic compromise less likely, because if they're using that second account for just normal day-to-day business, that is where they're most likely to come across a threat, a malware, something like that. And equally, if you're able to restrict access to that administrative account and audit it so that you know when it is being used appropriately, it helps from the malicious insider threat as well. Finance officer is a similar example. They might have 2 user accounts, or perhaps even 2 machines, one with absolutely no privileges other than accessing the financial platform. There's a particular form of malware doing the rounds at the moment called Emotet TrickBot. It's extremely nasty. Once you get it onto your computer, the best advice really is to throw the computer into a skip, because it just absolutely infests the machine. It's got several different modules that go around it, and it particularly targets finance officers. If you've got your whole financial function on a separate computer altogether and away from where that attack is likely to come in, you're less likely to accidentally activate it. And obviously, where the risk is the person, you really do need to plan for an eventuality where that individual is suddenly and perhaps permanently unavailable. How are you going to respond to that person being unavailable, and who are you going to nominate to the void, even if that is only temporary? And all of these points really do cover quite a lot to do with not only a malicious insider, but also the accidental insider. Organisational culture then. For the accidental insider, you need to reduce the fear and the complexity of reporting incidents. If by accident I click on a link or I download some malware or things like that, I don't want to have the additional pressure as an employee of thinking I'm going to lose my job. That is more likely to make me try and cover it up or not disclose it to the IT people, at which point the problem can get even worse and can end up being a catastrophe rather than just a problem. So that's absolutely key. Most of these things don't tend to happen immediately. Even the malicious insiders, it'll typically have its root in something else. It could be a relationship breakdown, addiction, financial problems, gambling, any of those sorts of things. And the organisation as a culture can recognise those things way in advance. So it's about looking after your colleagues, spotting when they're in need of assistance and help and perhaps some guidance, and obviously pointing them in that direction before things get out of hand. Technology. Malicious insiders, as I said, they don't typically act immediately. They will try and test the systems first. They'll see what they can get away with. They'll test those folders, see if anybody notices what they're up to before they launch their main attack. So technologies such as active detection and prevention systems, data loss prevention technology, and usage auditing can assist you in mitigating those threats. You've got to remember, if you're thinking about using active or artificial intelligence technologies, that these will take time to establish a baseline. They've got to become accustomed to the system that you work on. You've got to train them, optimize them. So you need to plan ahead with how you're going to deal in the initial stages with false positives and false negatives. And by that I mean where the system triggers on a real user doing a real thing and it shouldn't have triggered, or a false negative, in other words, where it misses something that it should have picked up. You're trying to achieve a balance. It's never going to be absolutely perfect in both directions. You have to try and achieve a balance, which is known as the crossover point. So that is your goal. There's some other concepts that we can consider as well. These ones I've put in red. They're a little bit more sensitive to implement, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about those because I'm going to pass over to Martin shortly, and he'll be able to give you a more in-depth scrutiny of each. Screening is ensuring that you're employing suitable people. Can we perform checks on people before we employ them to make sure that they're suitable for the role? Can we do it lawfully? Can we do it ethically? Those are the key questions. Open source intelligence research, I mean, that is very, very similar screening. Are your employees acting with loyalty and integrity online? Do they represent your business favourably outside of work? And remember, they may also have very good reasons for not doing so. So it may be not necessarily the problem with the employee and the way they're representing your business, but it may actually be the business itself, and something that you can learn from and adapt the business to deal with that disfavourable mention. Mandatory vacations. I'm going to leave you with this one because I have another sort of little case study for you just to finish up. It ties in with division of responsibility, particularly in relation to malicious activity. If you think malicious activity is taking place on your network and you've got grounds to suspect an individual, can you put in a mandatory leave of absence to see if that activity ceases? So you monitor the activity and see whether it is interrupted or ceases altogether. And I have a personal case study involving where that was deployed. So in this particular case study, it was a security manager at a large retailer. All of the security staff shared the account. I spoke about shared accounts earlier and the problems with auditing. Technology detected successful browsing of sites featuring indecent images of children from the shared account. Businesses have a statutory duty in the UK to report that sort of behaviour to the authorities. Now, at that point, an individual is suspected of the browsing based on shift patterns, but it can't be proved that person is responsible. How are you going to deal with that? What we need to do is compare the browsing activity against the leave history, which is what we did in this particular case, and we were able to correlate the fact that the activity ceased while this individual was away and then resumed immediately when he returned to the organisation. At that point, as police officers, we can now be significantly more confident that that individual was responsible for the browsing and provided enough in this particular case to enable the arrest and search of the home premises. In this particular case, it turned out that the individual was a foster carer for several children in the local authority area. So you never realise when you first start looking at these things just how important that could be overall. And he was subsequently convicted and sentenced for offences relating to possession of indecent images of children. So a highly successful outcome based on that mandatory vacation principle. I appreciate we didn't send him on a mandatory vacation on that particular incident, but you can see how effective the leave patterns were in diagnosing the problem. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that little intro into insider threat and a few basic treatments. I'm just going to leave you as I hand over to Martin just now. That's my details there. I'm a police cyber security advisor for Surrey, Sussex, Hampshire and Thames Valley. And if you'd like to find out more about what we do and hear about some other threats and things like that as we come across them, those are our platforms on social media, so please give us a follow and have a look at the videos on the YouTube channel. There's plenty of stuff there to have a look at. I'm going to hand over now to Martin, who is Head of Business Development at Secure Screening Services, and just thank Martin and Adrian as well for allowing me to speak today. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thanks Dan. That was all good stuff. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll crack on. Martin Price, Head of Business Development for Secure Screening Services. So who am I? I was also a police officer for 18 years and did all sorts: general policing, riot squads, murder squads. Later on, went into counter-terrorism and disaster recovery, working latterly on intelligence and sorts of intelligence we looked at people's social media, and we'll be going into that shortly, and I can talk to you about how we can do that well and how we can do that properly. So why did we start this company? Well, time and time again I was witness to the damage that people could do to businesses. Again, they were getting defrauded, ripped off, stolen from, and every threat and every major damage to business was through their people. Also have a personal story where I had a dog walker. She came and let herself into my house on a regular basis. Occasionally I came home and thought, oh, the dog's a bit dry, this is very odd. So I decided to set up some surveillance equipment in my own home and found out that she was coming in, taking the money, not walking the dog. So that was annoying, especially when I found out she had a previous conviction for fraud, and I'm not joking, she changed her grandmother's cheque from 300 to 3,000 and cashed it. Now, if I'd have shown a bit more due diligence and run some checks on that lady and asked her to provide a DBS certificate, I would have been in that situation in the first place. So there's lots of ways we can protect ourselves and our organisations from harm, and we're going to talk about that today. So just a quick company overview. Secure Screening Services, based on the South Coast. We offer consistently high-level results. We try and be upfront and honest as possible, and we don't oversell, and provide excellent customer services. So we've got a really good online presence. We're Cyber Essentials accredited, which means the government's Cyber Essentials system where they check your data and make sure your data is secure. Because we're processing data, we have to make sure that that's as safe as possible. So moving on. Right, okay, so how it works is the company would register online, provide brief candidate information via our portal. The candidate's contacted via email and a link sent to them to register. They then provide their data to us, and they consent digitally at that time. And consent's really important when it comes to screening and with personal data. So that's how digitally and stored for the time in the details. So move on here. What we offer. Okay, so we offer basic DBS checks, enhanced DBS checks, qualification verifications, credit checks, social media checks, employment referencing, adverse media, directorship checks, ID verification, driving license checks, and rights to work checks. DBS checks, they don't actually expire. Once you've had one, they last. They don't expire, but the news around that is that they should be done every 3 years. And that's the advice from the Disclosure and Barring Service. They say every 3 years everyone should have that topped up again. Okay. Okay, and then we provide a report back to the client detailing all the information. So, why is screening so important? Okay, so it's been proven that 40% of people have admitted to lying on this. 67% of people admitted in the survey having stolen from work, and 11% of those people, of those 67, have revealed that they've stolen personal items from colleagues. So that's quite disconcerting. 87% of people said they would not tell their employer if they received penalty points on their driving license. Going into that, so the DVLA produce a driving license for the UK. If your employee drives in the course of their work and you haven't checked their driving license and they do something ridiculous, you could be liable. There's the Corporate Manslaughter Act 2007, which details that, bit of health and safety legislation, and there's also the Road Traffic Act of 1988 that has a bit in there, and it says use, cause and permit. And because you're causing that person to drive in the course of their employment, that's an offence. So if you're employing someone who haven't checked their driving licence, you could be taken to court as well, which is slightly worrying. Okay, so workplace violence accounts for 18% of all recorded violent crimes. Now, whether that's abnormally high because workplace crimes are more than not often not reported, who knows, but that's still a large percentage of workplace violence. And the cost of a bad hire is estimated to cost 2.5 times the average employee salary. So if you don't get it right and you have to get rid of someone, it's very costly and lengthy business. Okay, so the law says all employees must have a right to work check prior to employment. Right to work check legislation came in 2014 where it says that these checks must be done. If you're born in the UK and you're of UK origin, you still have to have a right to work check prior to employment. Lots of people miss that. Or people just think, well, it's somebody from the EU or further from the EU, I'll have to check their documents prior to employing them. It's not. It's absolutely everyone, and that's due to the laws brought in 2014. I've gone about the driving. I've talked about that, and if an employee has access to vulnerable people, they should have an enhanced DBS check. So if they've got access to elderly or young, unsupervised or left on their own, or for advice or whatever else, they need an enhanced DBS check. So that's really important. So going on, what we do here, we partner with HR professionals, and we offer Elfi. Basically, if you refer someone, you can earn a percentage of that invoice. And if you want to know more about that, you can message me afterwards, or details are on the thing. So if that's something that interests you, let me know. So social media screening. What is it all about? Okay, consent. I've spoken to a lot of people, and what they say is, oh, well, I've been on their Facebook, look around, and I'm happy with that. And I can go on, we'll look at a case study in a minute where actually it's really difficult to make that right. That's really difficult because what we're talking around privacy laws, you haven't got consent to do it. It is open source, but there are really tight privacy laws around that. So what we ask to do, when we do the screening process, we ask for a digitally signed consent from the candidate. This is stored, and they provide their not their logins, but their IDs for their social media accounts. There's no reverse engineering done. No one hacks their accounts. They just simply provide their details. We then look at their account. The term open source, it basically means it's open for everyone to see, and it's really easy to go through people's accounts and find out what they've been up to. It's really important, though, to talk about protected characteristics, and these are detailed in the Equalities Act of 2010. So all that list there, age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage, civil partnership, pregnancy, the list goes on, race, sex, sexual orientation, absolutely a protected characteristic, and at no time can you ever use one of those characteristics to report on social media. That's an absolute no-no. That's detailed in the Equalities Act, and rightly so. So why would you conduct social media checks? Well, in the police, we did a thing called tone setting. So if we were at a large event and hours before the public turned up, we'd tone set, which basically means we were visible and we showed people we were there and engaged with everyone there. And social media screening is a similar analogy when it comes to your organisation or the organisations you place people into. If you have a culture of screening and acting appropriately, that will run through the whole brand of the organisation. So not only does it make sure that you get the right people, but actually it sends a message to everyone, actually this company's quite tight on how you behave. So it's a really positive thing to do. It protects your brand, it prevents you from a bad hire. Obviously the risk reduction to employees and business, we've talked about workplace violence, that does happen. And also, we all see the benefit in a real diverse workforce. And if you introduce maybe a homophobe into a diverse working environment, think about the damage that can do to that whole team. And actually, is there any other way that we can prevent against it? Probably not. I mean, other than reading people's minds, social media is the closest you get to that. So people let their true selves show, not easy to say, on social media, and that's why we do that. Also, it's good to provide education around social media. So we don't just screen people, put people into the organisation. We provide an educational package around their social media upon completion to say, look, okay, we looked at your social media. It's open for the world to see. Let's talk about some privacy. Let's talk about locking your account down. And that does two things. It stops any nightmares in the future. Should they press the stupid button, as we call it, and do something in their private life or publicly, then their social media is locked down, so actually people can't get hold of their content and then disclose who they are publicly. It's quite an important thing to do. So education is a real key at the end of that. Okay. I'm going to go through some case studies now. Some of the content isn't pleasant. And it's not there to cause shock or offence, but it's basically there for you to realise what's out there without looking too hard. Some of it contains some racist and sexist content and details of drug use, so I've just got to make you aware of that before we move on. And I'm not here to offend anyone, but it's really there, and the only way we can stop this sort of thing in working environments is finding it in the first place. So let's have a look at example one. Example one. Okay, so you look at this is a Facebook screenshot of the home page. Looks rather nice, lovely image at the top. And if you look at the smaller image, I've redacted the names, but it's a wedding scene with a large family, looks great, and actually looks like a person you probably want to employ. So if you're going to do your own social media checks, which the Facebook stalking as we call it, one, it's not really lawful because we've got privacy laws to prevent against it. You've got no consent to do it, and actually from that everything will look fine. If you move on, this same person has commented on another post, and what you can't see from people's obvious social media are the things that they've liked in the past and commented on. You only see a fraction of that, and what you can do is you can go back from absolute conception to see there's some words and there's some things that we can do to dig out certain words. So and that says there, the same person's, anyone got any work going, groundwork driving, if I don't get a job soon, the missus is going to get one, and I'll have to tidy the house, and etc., etc. I'm not ready to swap my for a, and I basically redacted some language out there. So a little bit of sexist undertones there and overtones of who they actually are, and you're thinking from the first picture, well, this person looks fine, no problems at all. But actually, if you dig a little deeper and find out what you can find within people's social media, you can really think, oh, actually, is this a person I really want to involve in a team that is already running really well? And actually, it doesn't necessarily negate them from working in a team, but it might be worth a second interview. We never say you can't employ this person because of their social media, but what you can do is say, this is what we found, I think it's worth a conversation. So then you'd have a conversation, done the screening, and this is what we found, and then that, as a result of that second interview, you can then work out whether this person is going to be employable or not. The thing you really need to check is that, was this person in charge of their social media at the time of posting, and things like that, just to make sure that you're not on a sticky wicket later on. Okay, so example 2, an overtly right-wing shot there of somebody's social media. That's again Facebook, really easy to find, and the comments are terrible underneath. I've redacted those just to be more appropriate there, but you know, if you didn't go into their social media and this was actually behind it, actually, is that somebody again you want within your team? This person also, because you can check, we've got software to check likes back to inception, you can see everything they've liked back to day dot, and they've liked some really terrible comments about people being run over at a mosque too. So, as I say, we haven't looked far for this information. It's really easy to find people's details and go through it that way. So, example 3, there's called Cannabis, just simply Cannabis, and people go on there and post their bits and bobs. And it says there, I'm not addicted to weed, I'm addicted to being happy, and weed makes me happy, so I smoke it daily. The person here said, I couldn't work without my morning spliff and coffee, and my after-work doobie, pre-rolled in my bag, ready to go. So you're offering this person a job. They're basically admitting to smoking drugs before work and after work. And that's really easy to find out if they're posting that sort of stuff on their social media. That would present itself in its report, and then you could make a decision, or the people could make a decision there on whether they wanted to hire somebody or not. Twitter's another really complex beast. We've got some really clever analytical tools that will go through and give you every tweet that everyone's ever tweeted. Some people it's thousands, and it goes on to give you a word cloud. It also goes on to detail tweets by sentiment, so it can it classifies words, and it goes terrible, bad, neutral, good, and great. And you can see the wheel there that can split up people's words and basically see the sentiment of their Twitter account as well. So you can go through and you can find out everything been retweeted and been put out there for the public to see. And it's really key, especially if you're employing really key decision makers within an organisation, to make sure that their social media account is appropriate for what they're doing. Because if it's not appropriate, the actually is not going to be appropriate in the workplace. So that's a real whistle-stop tour of social media screening. If anyone's got any questions for me and Dan, please type them out quickly, and we'll get to those straight away. If there's not, that's no problems at all. I haven't got anything as yet, but I'll pass over and we can work out sort of that main chat. Here we go. Let's have a look.
Hi Martin, how are you doing?
Hi, yeah, good. Hi Adrian, you all right?
So one quick question I had was, it seems pretty sensible that obviously some of these extreme examples, I mean, maybe they're not the brightest, but you would imagine they would, I know they've got a handover, they would imagine they would say, oh, you know, either I don't have that many social media accounts, or here's one over here for me, or I'm just surprised that these people would hand over their social media accounts when they are so blatantly, let's say, problematic.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. What we will do it only with consent, because actually we're not going to go digging around people's history. But what we can do is we can find linked accounts, and we can find deleted accounts. There's things called a Wayback Machine, which is a very clever computer that allows you to look back at people's social media accounts before they've deleted everything from there as well. So because it's open source research, because that open source is always out there, even if they, okay, I'm going to be screened, I'm going to delete all this information, That's fine. They can delete it all, but we can use a clever piece of software that take us back to the date of consent. We can go back in then and work out what's been on there and what's not appropriate.
Yeah, because I would imagine when you mentioned about consent, it seemed the sort of thing maybe people wouldn't read in detail, and it might say that we do background checking, and this includes, and then the individual doesn't necessarily read that in detail, but obviously says, okay, I'm fine, I'm signed off for you to do checking on me. But obviously when you're asking for them to give over the name of their accounts, then it's a bit more blatant that this is actually going to be about social media and it's going to happen. So and
it goes back to that tone setting as well, where it says, actually, you may have behaved like this in the past, but actually you won't behave like this in the future. And that educational package that we provide as well really allows people to check their behaviour and make sure they act appropriately in those environments as well. So, it's a tricky. It really is a tricky. I mean, the screening that we do, the DBS checks, the employment references, they're all out there. They've been done for a long time. And it's about how you deliver that package and how quick you are and how precise your data is. That's what makes you successful in the screening industry. The social media screening is a really difficult thing, but it has to be tackled because it's where people show themselves, and it really is important to the hiring process, especially around those key decision makers that you're employing. Yeah.
Brilliant. Right, so you can see some questions coming through. Let me read them to you.
Yeah.
So, if you tell a candidate interview you'll be checking their social media, is that consent?
No, because it's not recorded anywhere.
Yeah.
So the consent needs to be recorded.
Yeah. Can you confirm how you broach consent with prospective employees?
Yeah, we basically they go onto the portal, and really detailed, but simply laid out consensual digital form. Whereas we say, we will look at your social media, we will do this, you will supply us this, and it really is laid out for them. They digitally sign, click to agree, sign that, and that's kept forever. So that's really, but with a lot of consent forms, what happens is they become too wordy and people don't read them. But we've made sure it's really simple so people understand what they're getting themselves into.
Okay, Lorna's asked about, do you have a template for consent, telling people what you're going to check, so I presume you do.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you have a conversation about what has been on social media if you haven't obtained consent? I'd imagine
Very tricky one. No, because you basically looked at it unlawfully, and there's that privacy issue around that. So it's best to get it done properly, and then you can ask questions around the content that you find.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, let's imagine someone's LinkedIn. Oh, here we go. Literally the question I was thinking of. Maybe we just read Andrew's. How much time do recruiters spend screening my LinkedIn page compared to my CV? Well, the question I also had linked to that was, if someone gives you a CV these days, and quite a lot of the time, it'll have a link to their LinkedIn profile. I presume that might be some sort of implied consent, as in, feel free to check this out. They put it on their CV.
Yeah.
But I don't know where you draw the line there.
Yeah, people use LinkedIn as their professional profile, and that's what it's for. It's the other accounts. Obviously, we screen LinkedIn, but it's the other accounts that people don't think are going to be screened that we ask for consent for. And actually, it covers everything anyway.
Yeah. Okay. How far do you go back? Surely, is people able to change when young or a teenager? They'll be a very different person to say when they hit 30. This is if you watch any American politics, and they've had a big argument and national debate over a sexual assault claim against someone who's now in their 50s that he'd given as a teenager, and this come out as part of that conversation. But I guess at the end of the day, you want to know. You want to know what's there.
People change. Yeah, people change. I mean, if somebody smoked a bit of weed at university 20 years ago. Is it going to make them a bad finance manager today? I don't know, but that's the sort of question you need to ask yourself. And actually, people have that second chance, and I think it's really important to take everything on face value because people change a lot through their lifetimes, and that's a judgment call for the organisation. And that's what we really careful to do is not give an opinion. We give the facts and we give the details, and it's up to the organisation to make a decision on what they've got.
And I think, from my perspective, I would look at it and say, as an organisation, it makes you look incredibly thorough. I guess many of the organisations doing this is because they're working in certain sectors where, the people they hire is really critical. So this just shows your incredibly thorough. So the organisation is good at what they do. So as a first introduction to the organisation, it bodes well, I guess. And I guess you can find out a lot if someone did smoke weed at university. You can find out something about them now by seeing how well they, deal with that issue.
How people change and not rehabilitate, but that's, life happens to people, and so sometimes you see a strength of character. People come out and reinvent themselves. So that's another strength you can pull from that, I suppose.
Yeah. So Lorna's asked, do you think it's likely that Donald is working in another school somewhere? I would hope that our school system is a bit more robust, but
I'll jump in there. Just before I answer Lorna, can I just refer back to Isabella's question about people changing when they get older and things like that? I think that opens up the other angle, which is from the employee side, which is, are you aware of how much we call a digital footprint, or some people call it digital dirt, is out there? And it can have a significant effect on your employment. There's no doubt that that's the case. So I think as you get older and your views and opinions do change with age, it's important to remember that persistence of what you post online will still be there unless you take steps to obviously remove it and make it clear that you've changed your position. So it's important to see it from both sides of the coin, really. Just speaking with Lorna then in relation to Donald and if he's working in another school somewhere. He is still, as far as I'm aware, the last time I heard of Donald, I believe he is still wanted. I would say it's probably quite unlikely that he's working in another school somewhere in the UK. Whether or not he's managed to get out of the UK would be another question altogether. But I would say it's unlikely he's working in another school in the UK. Okay. So I'll pass back to Martin because I think there was another one from Helen just there, so I'll just pass it back.
Yeah, this is a good one for you. As a business, do you offer the social media screening, or do you have to buy the whole package? I guess there's people on this session that already have providers doing the more official background checking.
Sure. Well, we've set up so you can buy a really bespoke range. So you can buy a package, or you can just buy one check, and any one check at any time. So if you just wanted to buy a social media screening on a certain person, you can go on, log on, buy that one package, and we get the information for that. Yeah, so it's really agile system.
And I'm going to ask a question, but it's a good question. It's a question I always ask is, so how much does it cost in a ballpark? I appreciate it will differ if you're buying a package rather than buying a one-off, I would imagine.
Yeah, sure. But it's for social media screening, it's £80. So I don't think that's a bad investment because it's not something that's ever automated. You can't automate it. It needs a human eye. And we're all qualified investigators from our previous lives in the police and lots of intelligence working around that. So, you pay for that skill, but it's £80 for a social media screening, yeah.
Right, okay.
Not bad, is it? It's quite cheap.
Seems it's I guess it just comes down to the risk, isn't it, as well? It's what people are buying, that peace of mind and risk.
Yeah.
And when I look at all types, when you look at all types of background checking, you do wonder why everyone doesn't do everything, because it just seems like the risk is
especially around legislation around driving and everything else, and rights to work as well, which is often dropped.
Yeah, and I guess a few people will be parents like myself coming into this now, and it makes it really interesting for your own kids and sort of educating them as to what happens. My kids are not quite old enough to be on social media yet, but just and as you just start them off in the right way at the very least. So yeah.
Absolutely, just need that management. Just so, because if you look back to, I think it's 2013, there was a youth crime commissioner. She was 17, and they basically went through her social media account, the papers did, and they tore her to bits. And goodness knows what happened to her now. There was some really inappropriate stuff on there, but you remember she was 17, and that's an educational thing more than anything else. And if you are a parent, that needs that arm around the shoulder just to make sure they're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So Helen's asked, is the presentation going to be available? As I don't have a chance to write down all the contact details. So yeah, we can certainly get that out to you. In the next 24 hours, Helen will either our marketing team or Martin will reach out to you with the notes and other bits and bobs that you might need. Let's just see if there's any other questions that might come through. We'll give people a last chance. Yeah, I'd imagine you're not short of the odd story or two when you, with a background in a police force and now you're doing this. It must be, obviously you probably can't share most of them.
Well, I probably can now. I have signed the Official Secrets Act, but I think I've got a few years left yet before I can talk about some stuff. But
excellent.
Yeah,
You've got to write. There's a book coming at some point.
I'll start now.
I knew this was going to be. Like I say, I do enjoy the guest webinars we do. Some of them, they can be very much on an important subject, but maybe not as, I suppose, intriguing. We've got one tomorrow on trustee recruitment, which it probably isn't going to be as lively as this one, to be honest. But this is a really fascinating subject. So I think we'll leave it there. But I will pass on from everyone else my thanks. It's been a really good session. Thanks, and thanks obviously to Dan as well. Yeah. Slightly worried me because obviously the owner of a business now, but I'll be having a few questions to a few people, and
have a coffee with him.
Yeah, I might have to. Yeah, I might have to think about some of this stuff a bit more seriously. But thanks very much, guys, and hopefully we might get a chance to do it again. And thanks to everyone else for your questions.
Thank you very much.